Samson of his time, irrespective to Islamophobic propaganda.
The history of terrorism started in Egypt by creating the Muslim Brotherhood as a political religious organization, and they used violence to convey their message.
As we have visited the beginning stages of what some have deemed as the roots of Islamic terrorism, that now subjectively to the American lexicon is equated to suicide bombers, what Kahana's son said about Goldstein is the prime example to show the unexpected fundamental polar opposite through Judaism. Based on the Old Testament character, or as what American audiences once remember sexualized with the story of Samson and Delilah, sometimes considered the Israelite version of Hercules. Samson, who's eventually captured by the Philistines, then tortured, and in the end, brings down Dagon's temple, knocking his pillars, killing himself along with all his enemies inside. Nobel Peace Prize winner Seymour Hersh documented in his own book titled The Samson Option, Israel and the Bomb. Israel from its own inception has framed its entire national defense policy around developing nuclear bombs. Hersh claimed that if necessary, Israelis are essentially willing to blow up the world, including themselves, if they have to do so in order to defeat Arabs and foes they perceive are a danger to Israel's survival. This glorification of founding suicidal combat is later revered going back to the famous mass suicide of Massada by Jewish zealots known as the Siege of Massada, with Roman troops at the end of the First Jewish-Roman War, just like what so-called alt-media sites like WorldNet Daily like to promote.
Massada, the place we left, as Roman soldiers stood on the top amidst the destruction 2,000 years ago, beholding the last Israelite soldiers having taken their own lives rather than give up. Israel was raised from the dead of history, that was her grave, and became a nation again.
Although it's important to recognize Israel being founded in 1948 through modern-day colonialization by European Zionist settlers in a wide range of attacks that in some cases did reach those sacrificial extremes before and after, they are in itself the innovations of modern terrorism by way of such Jewish paramilitary and terrorist groups as the Haganah, Irgun, and Stern Gang, which now the West continues to suffer with its repercussions till this day.
An episode that shocked the world in 1946 in the same way the Munich Olympic tragedy shocked the world last year was the blowing up of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem by Jewish terrorists. One of the leaders of Stern, now a political writer in Israel, was Nathan Yallinmore.
Was not the state of Israel founded in part on the use of terror by Stern Gang, by Irgun?
Of course, I admit.
So you, a former member of the Stern Gang, respect the fighters of Black September?
Of course I respect them. I know that, I wouldn't like to use the same methods as they use. Because they do it differently than we did.
As what Mike Wallace stated about the Munich tragedy shocking the world the same way as the bombing of the King David Hotel, the reality is with the American lexicon, especially today in regards to the foundation of Israel and terrorism in the Middle East. When the awful tragedy with the 1972 Munich Olympics is discovered in this day and age, it is simply thought of as Islamic terrorist by today's standards. But if you research the Black September and what actually happened through the almost 24-hour ordeal in Munich, West Germany, where Palestinian terrorists dressed in safari uniforms had taken members of the Israeli Olympic team during the Summer Olympics, known as the Munich Massacre, in which all 11 athletes and officials were kidnapped and killed, as well as a terrorist and a policeman, in a tragic failed rescue operation to thwart the members of the Black September from escaping with the remaining hostages to Egypt. But since we're on a roll with cinematic examples, if one were just to rely on Steven Spielberg's 2005 Hollywood movie Munich, which barely covers what all happened throughout the ordeal, viewers would be inclined to think these were just simply Muslim terrorists. However, if you watch the 1976 ABC made-for-TV movie 21 Hours at Munich, you will find some disturbing truths with the Black September leader over the whole ordeal, Latif Afif, from within this scene during the hostage negotiation towards the press.
My mother is a Jew, as a matter of fact. Why do you look so surprised?
And Latif's father was also a Palestinian Christian. A very sad story indeed, considering what the qualifications are for Jewish birthrights and Israeli citizenship. But again, with Mike Wallace and the 60-minute piece.
The fact is that innocent people die from terror, whoever the terrorist. The Jewish independence fighters, trying to hasten the exit of the British from Palestine and to intimidate the Arab population there, bombed bus stops and office buildings, railroad trains and shopping crowds. The fighters of Stern and Irgun took a toll of innocent victims that ran into the hundreds. Leader of the Irgun was Menachem Begin, now a member of the Israeli parliament.
We took all the risks possible in our lives during the fight. We never left this country. The British were here carrying our pictures by every policeman, every soldier. We took all the risks involved in such a fight as everybody else. But I don't want any comparison, even by dissimilarity, between us and the Black September and the Fatah. Completely different stories of a fight, either in the aim or in the method or in the intention. And let us not repeat that sacrilege, Mr. Wallace.
It is sacrilege to you.
It is.
But apparently it isn't sacrilege if an Israeli wants to blow themselves up, because the concept of a right-wing Israeli suicide bomber is plausible for being used in carrying out false flags for Israel's contingency. Because on October 18, 1983, a 22-year-old man named Israel Rabinowitz, who had arrived in the U.S. 2 weeks earlier carrying an Israeli passport, was arrested attempting to bomb the U.S. Capitol with 2 drink bottles filled with a powdered substance attached to his belt, wired to an operating detonation cap while approached in the House gallery by officers for acting suspicious, where then he threatened to blow up the building. Police were able to detain him and he was charged for threatening to kidnap a person or cause bodily harm. And like the same old story we've heard before, he was eventually deported back to Israel a couple of months later. And looking at 9/11, some have suggested the possibility that 3 of the hijacked flights involved could have been carried out by Israelis taking on a suicide mission, either posing as passengers or even in some combination disguised with a real team cell of Muslim Arab hijackers, a suggestion based on accent of hijacker's voice from cockpit recording and early misreporting of hijacker identities either being reported alive or the inconsistent chain of evidence for 14 of the hijackers boarding 3 flights from Boston Logan and Newark airports. By all these examples and anomalies, we are not suggesting such an outsourced suicide mission or plan was carried out by Israel within the 9/11 attacks, but we are advocating that the attacks to take down the World Trade Center did mutate from Ramzi Youssef's original intention, already morphed with the Bojinka plot, and that in fact its method of crashing passenger airliners was in some part inspired by Japanese kamikaze pilots during World War II. But such violent ideas of twisted acts are no different than what's already been demonstrated by nostalgia with the wide range of cinema and television of yesteryear that has influenced all cultures in modern civilization. But Israel's sacred terrorism must be fairly analyzed and compared, no matter how uncomfortably similar it is to the already familiar Islamic version of it. This is set to demonstrate the possibility of how both these worlds will and can overlap, despite the differences of fundamentalism, whether each side is privy to all players in a big conspiracy in every circumstance, and that just generally speaking, American conspiracy theorists or citizen activists are usually consumed by panic, depression, and paranoia, viewing the world through an Orientalist lens, incapable of grasping the complexity of foreign state-sponsored terrorism added with an allied network of nebulous groups, thus unable to recognize the nature of problems at home and abroad, as well as international organized crime.